My name is Sarah, and I live in a small white brick house on Rosehill Lane in Ashford, Europe. That morning, I walked outside, picked up the mail, and opened a thick letter. My heart raced as I read that my house now had a new loan of $280,000. I knew I had never signed anything. Before I could understand what happened, my phone rang. It was my sister, Emily. She laughed and said, "Foolish fool, I used the power of attorney. I took what we needed for the wedding." I stayed silent, ended the call, and made one phone call. After I ended the call, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The loan letter was still lying in front of me. I read every line again, hoping I had misunderstood something. I checked my name, my address, and the amount. Everything was correct. My house on Rosehill Lane in Ashford, Europe, had been used as security for a loan of $280,000. I felt sick because I knew I had never agreed to it. My hands were cold, but my mind was becoming clear. I could not waste time crying. I had to find out the truth. The only person I could think of was a lawyer. I searched through an old notebook until I found the name of Daniel Brooks. A close friend had once told me that Daniel was honest, patient, and never afraid to fight for people who had been treated unfairly. I called his office and explained that I had an emergency. His assistant found a free appointment that afternoon. The hours before the meeting felt longer than any day I had ever lived. I walked through every room of my house, looking at the walls, the windows, and the family photographs. This house was more than bricks and paint. It held every memory of my parents. I could not let anyone take it away. Daniel welcomed me into his office with a calm smile. He invited me to sit down and handed me a glass of water. Without interrupting, he listened as I explained everything from the beginning. I showed him the loan letter and repeated every word my sister had said during the phone call. When I finished, he quietly studied the documents for several minutes. Finally, he looked at me and said, "Sarah, this situation is serious, but you did the right thing by coming here immediately. We need to collect every document before anyone has a chance to hide the truth." His words gave me a little hope. For the first time that day, I felt that someone believed me. Daniel asked many questions. Had I signed any recent papers? Had I visited a bank? Had I given anyone permission to borrow money? I answered every question with the same reply. No. I had done none of those things. The only legal document connected to my sister was the power of attorney I had signed years earlier while recovering from surgery. I trusted her completely at that time. I never imagined she would use it for something that would put my home at risk. Daniel explained that a power of attorney did not give someone the right to do whatever they wanted. The person holding it had a duty to act honestly and protect the interests of the owner. If Emily had used that authority only to benefit herself without my knowledge, there could be serious legal consequences. Hearing those words was painful because I never wanted my sister to face legal trouble. Even after everything she had said, she was still my sister. But I also knew I could not ignore what had happened. The next morning, Daniel and I visited the lending company. The manager introduced himself as Thomas Reed. He looked surprised when he learned why we were there. Daniel requested copies of every document related to the loan. Thomas returned with a large file. Together, we carefully looked through every page. There were forms, financial records, property papers, and signatures. Some signatures belonged to Emily, acting under the power of attorney. I stared at the pages, unable to believe that my own sister had completed all this without telling me. Daniel asked Thomas several careful questions. The manager admitted that the loan had been approved because the paperwork appeared complete. Emily had explained that the money would be used for an important family matter. Since the documents seemed valid, no one contacted me directly. Daniel thanked the manager for his honesty and requested certified copies of every record. Before we left, Thomas quietly apologized. He said he had never expected the documents to become part of a family dispute. As more information appeared, the truth became impossible to ignore. Emily and her fiancé, Michael Carter, had planned an extravagant wedding in Brighton, Europe. They had reserved a historic hall overlooking the river. The decorations included thousands of fresh flowers, crystal lights, expensive table settings, and live musicians. Guests had been invited from different cities across Europe and America. A luxury photographer, a famous chef, and a professional event planner had all been hired. The wedding budget had grown far beyond what they could afford. Instead of reducing the cost or asking family members for help, Emily chose another path. She used my power of attorney to secure the loan against my house. She convinced herself that everything would work out later. Maybe she believed she could repay the money quickly. Maybe she thought I would forgive her once the wedding was over. Whatever her reasons were, she never gave me the chance to make my own decision. She took that choice away from me. Daniel continued gathering evidence. He collected emails, payment records, contracts, and bank statements. Every document connected another piece of the story. Together they showed exactly where the money had gone. Payments had been made to the wedding venue, the catering company, the florist, the musicians, and the designer who created Emily's custom wedding dress. None of the money had been spent on me or my house. Every dollar had been used to build the perfect celebration. I struggled with my emotions during those days. Some mornings I woke up angry. Other mornings I only felt sadness. I remembered the years when Emily and I had shared the same bedroom as children. We used to laugh together, tell each other secrets, and promise that nothing would ever come between us. Looking back at those memories made the present hurt even more. It was difficult to understand how someone I loved so deeply could make a decision that threatened everything I owned. One evening, my closest friend, Olivia Bennett, visited my house. She brought dinner because she knew I had not been eating well. We sat in the kitchen and talked for hours. Olivia reminded me that protecting myself did not mean I hated my sister. It simply meant I refused to accept dishonesty. Her words stayed with me long after she left. I realized that standing up for myself was not an act of revenge. It was an act of self-respect. A few days later, Daniel called and asked me to visit his office again. When I arrived, every document was neatly arranged across his desk. He had organized everything in order, creating a complete timeline from the day the loan application was submitted until the money was released. He explained each step carefully so I would understand exactly what had happened. There were no missing pieces anymore. The evidence was clear, detailed, and impossible to deny. Daniel closed the final file and looked directly at me. "Sarah," he said calmly, "we have everything we need." I took a deep breath. "What happens now?" "We make sure the truth is heard," he replied. I looked out the window of his office toward the quiet streets of Ashford. I knew the next step would be painful. My sister's wedding was only one day away. Part of me wanted to stay home and forget everything. Another part knew that if I remained silent, I might lose the house my parents had worked so hard to leave behind. For the first time since opening that terrible letter, I was no longer afraid. I was ready to face whatever came next. The morning of the wedding arrived with clear skies and a cool breeze. From the window of my house on Rosehill Lane, I watched the sun slowly rise over Ashford, Europe. It looked like the beginning of a beautiful day, but my heart felt heavy. I had barely slept the night before. Every time I closed my eyes, I remembered the loan letter and Emily's words on the phone. I kept asking myself how everything had gone so wrong. I had always believed that family should protect one another, not betray each other. I got dressed in a simple navy blue dress that my mother had once said looked elegant without trying too hard. I did not want to attract attention. I was not going to the wedding to ruin anyone's happiness. I was going because I wanted the truth to be known. Daniel Brooks had already explained every legal step we would take. He reminded me that we would remain calm, respectful, and honest. We would let the facts speak for themselves. Before leaving, I walked through every room of my house. I touched the old wooden table where my parents had shared countless meals. I paused beside the fireplace where we had celebrated birthdays and holidays together. Those memories gave me strength. This house was more than property. It was the place where my family had built their lives. I silently promised myself that I would do everything possible to protect it. Daniel arrived exactly on time. As we drove toward Brighton, Europe, neither of us spoke very much. The roads were busy with people traveling to the weekend celebrations. Colorful flowers decorated many gardens, and families filled the parks. It was strange to see so much happiness while I carried so much sadness inside. Daniel finally broke the silence. "Are you certain you want to do this today?" he asked gently. I looked out the window for a moment before answering. "I wish none of this had happened," I said. "But if I stay silent today, I may lose everything tomorrow." Daniel nodded with understanding. "You are standing up for yourself," he replied. "That is never something to be ashamed of." When we arrived at the church, expensive cars were already filling the parking area. Guests were laughing, taking photographs, and greeting one another with warm smiles. Beautiful white flowers decorated the entrance. Soft music floated through the open doors. Everything looked perfect from the outside. As Daniel and I entered, I noticed familiar faces from different cities across Europe and America. Friends and relatives filled the rows of wooden benches. Many people smiled politely when they saw me, believing I had simply come to celebrate my sister's wedding. No one knew what had happened behind the scenes. I quietly took a seat near the back of the church beside Daniel. I tried to remain calm as the ceremony began. The musicians played a gentle melody while everyone stood. Emily slowly walked down the aisle wearing a beautiful white gown covered with delicate lace. Her long veil flowed behind her, and many guests wiped tears from their eyes. She looked happy, confident, and completely certain that this would be the best day of her life. At the front of the church stood Michael Carter, waiting beside the altar. He smiled proudly as Emily approached him. Looking at his face, I began to wonder how much he truly knew. Had Emily told him where the money came from? Or had he believed that everything had been paid for honestly? I could not answer those questions, but I hoped the truth would soon become clear. The wedding official welcomed everyone and spoke about love, trust, and lifelong commitment. Those words struck me deeply. Trust was exactly what had been broken between my sister and me. As the official continued speaking, I looked down at my hands and tried to steady my breathing. Daniel quietly placed a folder on his lap. Inside were every document we had collected during the past several days. When the official asked if anyone had any legal reason why the marriage should not continue, Daniel slowly stood up. The church became completely silent. Every guest turned to look at him. Daniel spoke in a calm and respectful voice. "My name is Daniel Brooks, legal representative for Sarah. We respectfully request that this ceremony pause because serious legal matters connected to the funding of this wedding require immediate attention." Confused whispers spread across the room. Emily's smile disappeared almost instantly. She looked directly at me with wide eyes. "What is this?" she demanded. Daniel walked toward the front and handed several documents to the wedding official. These papers show that a loan of $280,000 was secured against Sarah's home without her informed permission. The matter is now under legal investigation. The church fell silent again. Michael stared at Emily in complete disbelief. "What is he talking about?" Michael asked quietly. Emily hesitated before answering. It was only temporary," she whispered. Michael looked shocked. "You told me your family agreed to help." Emily lowered her eyes. I thought I could fix everything after the wedding. The room filled with murmurs. Some guests looked at me with sympathy, while others looked at Emily with disappointment. No one seemed to know what to say. The wedding official carefully reviewed the documents before speaking. Because this matter involves serious legal concerns, I cannot continue this ceremony until these issues are resolved. Emily suddenly turned toward me. "You've embarrassed me," she cried. For a moment, I simply looked at her. I saw anger in her face, but beneath it I also saw fear. I slowly stood and walked toward the front of the church. My voice remained calm. "I didn't come here to embarrass you." "Then why are you doing this?" she asked. I took a deep breath. When I opened that letter, I learned my home had been placed at risk. "I called you because I thought there had been a mistake. Instead, you laughed and called me a foolish fool. You never asked for my help. You never told me the truth. You made a decision that could have taken away the only home I have left." Emily could not answer. Michael stepped away from the altar and faced her. "Is everything she said true?" he asked. Emily slowly nodded. "I was afraid if I told you, both of you would say no." Michael closed his eyes for several seconds. "You should have trusted us enough to ask." Tears rolled down Emily's face. "I wanted everything to be perfect." I quietly replied, "A perfect wedding built on dishonesty can never bring real happiness." No one spoke after that. The musicians stopped playing. The guests remained seated in silence. The beautiful flowers, the expensive decorations, and the elegant hall suddenly seemed meaningless. Everything that had looked perfect only minutes earlier now felt empty. The wedding official announced that the ceremony would not continue that day. Guests slowly began leaving the church. Many quietly wished me strength as they passed. Others simply walked away without saying a word. The joyful celebration had ended before a single wedding vow had been exchanged. As Daniel and I prepared to leave, Michael approached me. "I didn't know," he said sincerely. "If I had known, I never would have allowed any of this." I nodded. "I believe you." He looked back at Emily, who was sitting alone near the altar with tears in her eyes. "I hope one day she understands what this has cost." "So do I answered softly. Daniel and I walked outside into the cool afternoon air. The bright sunshine was still there, but everything felt different. I was not happy that the wedding had stopped. I felt no victory. I felt only sadness for the family we once had and the trust that had been broken. Still, as we drove away from the church, I realized something important. For the first time since opening that terrible letter, I was no longer carrying the weight alone. The truth was finally out, and whatever happened next, it would be built on honesty instead of silence. When I returned home after the wedding, the house felt quieter than ever before. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and placed my keys on the small wooden table near the entrance. For a few minutes, I simply stood there without moving. The silence wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. A few days earlier, I had been worried about losing this house forever. Now the truth had finally come out, but the cost had been much greater than I had imagined. My relationship with my sister had been broken, and no legal victory could erase that pain. The next morning, Daniel Brooks called to let me know that the court had scheduled an early hearing. He sounded confident because every document clearly showed how the loan had been obtained. Still, he reminded me to stay patient because legal matters often took time. I thanked him for standing beside me through everything. If I had faced the situation alone, I might have given up before the truth was ever heard. Over the following weeks, Daniel continued collecting every record connected to the loan. The lending company fully cooperated after discovering what had happened. Employees handed over signed documents, approval forms, payment records, and communication logs. Every page told the same story. Emily had used the power of attorney to secure the loan against my house without telling me. The money had then been used to pay wedding expenses, including the venue, decorations, music, catering, photography, and many other luxury services. When the hearing finally arrived, I felt nervous as I entered the courthouse in Ashford. The building was large, with tall windows that allowed sunlight to shine across the polished floors. Daniel greeted me with a reassuring smile before we entered the courtroom together. Emily was already there with her own lawyer. She looked tired, and the confidence I had seen on her wedding day was gone. She avoided looking in my direction. The judge carefully reviewed every document. Daniel calmly explained the timeline, beginning with the power of attorney that I had signed years earlier while recovering from surgery. He explained that I had trusted my sister to help me only if necessary, never to place my home at financial risk for her personal plans. He presented every document showing where the money had gone and demonstrated that I had never been informed about the loan before receiving the letter in my mailbox. Emily's lawyer argued that she had believed she would repay the money quickly and that no lasting harm had been intended. The judge listened respectfully but asked one simple question. Did Sarah know about the loan before it was approved? The courtroom became silent. Emily slowly answered, no. That single word changed everything. After reviewing the evidence, the judge ruled that the loan had not been properly authorized because it had been obtained without my informed consent. The lender immediately began the process of canceling the loan. My house would no longer be used as security for the debt. Hearing those words felt like breathing fresh air after being trapped in a dark room. Tears filled my eyes, not because I had won, but because my parents' home was finally safe again. Outside the courthouse, several people congratulated Daniel on his work. He smiled politely before turning toward me. You protected what mattered, he said. I couldn't have done it without you, I replied. He shook my hand and wished me peace before leaving for another case. As I watched him walk away, I knew I would always be grateful for his honesty, patience, and determination. Life slowly returned to normal, but not everything healed as quickly as the legal case. The neighbors had heard about what happened, and many offered kind words whenever they saw me. Some brought homemade meals, while others simply stopped to ask how I was doing. Their kindness reminded me that difficult times also reveal the goodness of people. Several weeks later, I decided to clean the attic. While sorting through old boxes, I found family photo albums that had not been opened in years. I sat on the floor and carefully turned each page. There were pictures of birthdays, holidays, school plays, and family vacations across Europe and America. In almost every photograph, Emily and I were smiling beside each other. We had once been best friends. I remembered how we used to build blanket forts in the living room, race bicycles along quiet streets, and promised that we would always protect each other. Looking at those photographs made me wonder when everything had changed. Had the change happened slowly over many years, or had it come from one bad decision that grew into many others? I still did not know the answer. About 2 months after the court hearing, someone knocked on my front door late one afternoon. When I opened it, Emily was standing outside. She looked completely different from the confident bride I had seen at the church. Her expensive clothes had been replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. Her eyes were red, and she looked as though she had not slept well for many nights. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "May I come in?" I stepped aside without saying a word. We sat together in the living room where we had once celebrated birthdays with our parents. The silence felt uncomfortable, but it also felt honest. There was no pretending anymore. Emily looked down at her hands. I've practiced this conversation many times, she said quietly. Every version sounded better in my head. I waited patiently. I'm sorry, Sarah. Her voice broke as she spoke. I thought I could borrow the money, have the wedding, and repay everything before you ever found out. When the costs kept growing, I convinced myself that I would solve the problem later. Instead of asking for help, I kept making worse decisions. I listened without interrupting. I was angry when you came to the church, she continued. I blamed you because it was easier than admitting what I had done. But after everything happened, I realized the truth. None of this was your fault. It was mine. Tears slowly rolled down her face. I betrayed your trust. Those words were harder to hear than I expected. For a long moment, I looked around the room. Every corner held memories of our childhood. I thought about our parents and what they would have wanted. I trusted you more than anyone, I finally said. I know, Emily answered softly. When you laughed on the phone, it hurt more than the loan itself. She covered her face with her hands. I hate that moment more than anything. We sat quietly until she lowered her hands again. I don't expect you to forgive me today, she said. I only wanted you to know that I understand the damage I caused. I nodded slowly. Forgiveness isn't something that happens because someone says they're sorry. It takes time. I understand. I can't pretend nothing happened. I wouldn't ask you to. Her honesty was different now. There were no excuses left. Before leaving, Emily reached into her bag and placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a handwritten letter. I wrote everything I couldn't say aloud, she explained. Then she stood and walked toward the door. As she reached the entrance, she turned back one last time. I hope that one day we can be sisters again. After she left, I opened the letter and read every word. She described the fear, the pressure, the embarrassment, and the regret that had followed her every day since the wedding. She accepted responsibility for every choice she had made. There was no blaming anyone else. Reading those words did not erase the past, but it helped me believe that she truly wanted to change. The seasons slowly changed. Spring flowers gave way to warm summer days. My garden became colorful again, and I spent many evenings planting new roses beside the front walkway. Caring for the garden helped quiet my mind. It reminded me that damaged things can grow again when given enough time and care. Emily and I began speaking occasionally. At first, our conversations lasted only a few minutes. We talked about ordinary things like the weather, books, and family memories. Trust returned slowly, one small step at a time. There were still painful moments, but we no longer avoided each other. Michael also visited me one afternoon. He apologized for not asking more questions before the wedding. I told him I believed he had never intended to hurt anyone. We shared coffee on the back porch and spoke honestly about how quickly pride and silence can destroy good relationships. Before leaving, he thanked me for treating him with kindness even when everything around us had fallen apart. Months later, I stood in my front garden watching the sunset paint the sky with shades of orange and gold. The same mailbox where I had found that terrible lone letter stood quietly at the edge of the path. I smiled to myself because it no longer filled me with fear. Instead, it reminded me how strong I had become. Looking back, I realized the experience had changed me in ways I never expected. I learned that love should never require silence when something is wrong. I learned that trust is precious and should be protected with wisdom. I learned that asking difficult questions is sometimes an act of courage, not cruelty. Most importantly, I learned that standing up for yourself does not mean you have stopped loving the people who hurt you. My house on Rosehill Lane still stands exactly where it always has, filled with photographs, memories, laughter, and hope for better days. The walls have witnessed joy, heartbreak, forgiveness, and healing. They remind me every day that a home is not measured by its size or its value. It is measured by the strength of the person who refuses to give up on it. This chapter of my life began with one unexpected letter and one painful phone call. It led me through betrayal, fear, disappointment, and heartbreak. Yet it also led me to courage, truth, and a deeper understanding of myself. My name is Sarah, and this is the story I will never forget. I lost my peace for a while, but I never lost my voice. In the end, protecting my home also meant protecting my dignity, my future, and the values my parents taught me. Some scars never disappear completely, but they remind us of what we survived. Every morning when I open my front door and see the sunlight shining across my garden, I remember that even after the darkest days, hope always finds a way to return.